Uh, recognize a couple names in here, so it's great to see some of you again. And for those of you that I haven't met quite yet, glad you were able to join tonight. So this is our first breakout room of the evening. Really happy we're starting with this one. I think it's a really important piece to the building electrification puzzle here in Marin. So we're joined by Tom Kusia from the California Independent System Operator and Tom Nguyen from PG&E. And the focus of this room is on grid reliability and really how are we planning for building electrification at scale, and how are all of the respective players like the ISO and PG&E working to plan for that, right? And so the first question that I wanted to pose, and actually let me set some ground rules first before we start. It would be our preference to use the chat function. So if folks do have questions, feel free to put them in there. We're just going to capture that feedback and questions. So that would be the preferred method. But if you're not able to use the chat for whatever reason, please feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you too. And I did want to start out the session first with just a question to our two panelists, which is for Tom. And Tom, what are, in your opinion, the biggest challenges and opportunities, both for the ISO and with regard to building electrification?
I think from the ISO perspective, it's going to be the forecasting. And we work very closely with the local communities as they work with the CCAs. They'll be doing their annual forecast for what their loads will be. But then we're also having to forecast what the generation levels are going to be for the different communities. And as I showed in the charts in my presentation, we are now forecasting in both directions from load as well as supply and having to match that up. But we work closely with the different agencies, the PUC and the CEC, as well as the other participants within the market for those annual forecasts, and then we plan to it. And we are planning out 20 years in advance. So from the ISO's perspective, it's not that difficult, and we manage it on the annual moving forward.
Awesome, thank you, Tom.
Hyun, would you like to provide some input?
Yeah, hopefully you guys can hear me clearly here, or at least I hope.
It's coming in a little choppy, Tom.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like my internet's unstable. I'll try to be brief, and then I'll join the audio again. But I think comes to counties and so forth. And that way that can influence our forecast, and we can prepare what projects that are allowing us to accommodate that additional electric demand with the communities, and knowing what your timelines are, what goals you are setting, so that and make upgrades to the facility if it's really needed.
Great, thanks, Tom. And I see Mr. David Mahler's hand up. So David, I'll turn it over to you to ask any questions.
Great. You know, I was just typing my question, but I think it's one that's spoken much better. And this is for the two Toms. The issue that I hear all the time, in fact, some of the folks on the meeting tonight may know that I actually wrote a Marin Voice article that was published in the IJ just a couple of weeks ago, basically about the countywide effort to develop and broadly adopt an all-electric ordinance for new construction. And every single comment that came back in, the IJ allows readers to comment on, every single comment that came back said, the grid is never going to be able to keep up. What's this guy talking about? This is going to be a disaster. So my question to you two, as experts in grid reliability, generation, storage resources, just a bottom line, do you have serious concerns about the ability? I mean, it's going to take decades for this electrification to play out. Do you have serious concerns about the ability of the grid, generation, and storage resources to keep up with this electrification transition?
As we mentioned earlier, this is Tom Kusha from the ISO.
Yep.
It's going to take a suite of resources to be able to maintain the reliability. It's not one-stop shop for answers. But working with the different participants in the market, the generators, as well as the loads, having storage is going to be a great benefit to be able to utilize the renewable energies that's being produced. Right now, it's being curtailed. If it's needed, it can be stored from far out. But looking at it from a micro level, looking at the electrification of the homes and the communities, that's, like you said, it's going to take years in order to make those transitions. If we're looking at it from the annual forecasted amounts for what we project for what will come on as load, we can increase the generation accordingly each year. And that's what we've been working on so that we can still continue to meet other state mandates like the closing of the 1-2 cooling plants along the coast. There has been projections for the closing of the nuclear plant, but it looks like that may be on hold until a later time. So from the high voltage grid, we're not as concerned. Tom Hune, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I would say that it's going to be challenging, David. It's not easy. Imagine we can talk about two significantly different load that's coming in at 2 megawatts, and we can 2 megawatts. It takes a very split for that.
Hey, Tom, your audio is not coming through.
Also, just okay. I will defer to Tom Cucci. Yeah, that's answer hopefully.
Tom Hune, can you connect via the phone? It looks like you're connected, you're just muted on your phone.
Okay, why don't we table that question for now, and we'll go to some of the questions that have been asked in the chat. The first one that I saw came in was from Philip, and he asked, how can a procurement policy for low embodied carbon concrete be enacted? Philip, I'm not totally sure off the top of my head. I don't have the subject matter expertise in that issue. I'm not sure if either of the Toms do either. And if I'm wrong, let me know, Tom and Tom. But I do think that would be a question better suited for the breakout room with the County of Marin reps. So whatever room Brian Reyes is in that was facilitating the panel, I think he would likely have more insight into that question, Tom. Okay, so
how do I get in that room?
So we're gonna rotate here shortly, Philip. We're gonna spend 10-15 minutes in each breakout room, and you'll have the opportunity to join everyone. So thank you for
Sebastian, just a clarification on that. So everyone's going to stay in this room, and the facilitators are going to switch rooms.
Right. Thank you, Kellen. Okay. We had another question in the chat. Are there principal forecasting problems about data gaps, about computing design and capacity? And Tom Cusia, I'm picking some background noise up on your end. If you wouldn't mind muting when you're not speaking, that'd be great. So again, the question was, are there principal forecasting problems? Are these about data gaps or computing design capacity? Maybe I'll turn it over to Tom at the CAISO for this one?
We haven't been seeing a gap in regards to the forecasts as they come in by the different communities, like MCE does their forecast. Each municipality or municipal utility, as well as the investor-owned utilities, do their annual forecast. And so they base it off of what they know will be modified or changed within their system. And as that's added up, we forecast out the building out of the grid 20 years in advance. And so our plan to make sure we're able to move the energy, serve the loads within load pockets, but it'll be the distribution system operator, like the investor-owned utility, making sure that they're delivering on the distribution side. Building out those infrastructures in the neighborhoods, which is going to be more of a challenge.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. The next question I had here is from Karen, and it's a good one. So PG&E works with two different commodities, electric and gas. How will less of a focus on gas production help develop electric capacity? Tom, I know you're on the electric distribution side of things, but if you could speak a little bit to that question, it would be much appreciated.
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's much more clear.
All right, I apologize. I didn't hear the question.
Sure. So the question was, so since PG&E serves both electric and gas, how will less of a focus on gas production help develop electric capacity? Or is that the case, Tom?
That's interesting. I mean, that's a pretty financial driven question, which I would say I don't know I would say generically that. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of echo. I just say that it may not be a total loss of revenue. It'd probably just be a transfer to side. And that would.
Hey, Tom, I'm sorry. Your audio is still really choppy.
Hey,
Yeah.
Tom, this is Leonardo Trevino with PG&E. Maybe I can jump in and help with this one.
Yeah, Leo, go ahead. I just want to let everyone know we're going to be switching folks, the presenters, to different rooms at 7:10. But please go ahead and answer that question.
Yeah, just a quick response to that. So they are two separately different. There are two separate markets. So when we go to present our general rate case and we get our funding and our rate structure, gas customers and the gas rates pay for the gas infrastructure. Electric rates, electric general rate case really pays for the electric infrastructure. So they're two different businesses, or they really are separate.
So I'll go in order that they were asked. First question is from Fred. One hesitation for adopting REACH codes for all electric new construction relates to grid capacity and reliability. Can you address this concern? So perhaps Tom with the CAISO would be best suited to answer that one.
Hi, Fred. Good question. In regards to the reliability, the balancing load and supply and making sure that we're meeting our 60 hertz and being able to deliver, we work with very large plants, but we also, as I mentioned in my presentation, we import 25% of our energy from neighboring balancing authorities as well as the other states. We share that energy at different times of the day based off of the load pockets needs at the time. And with the Western Energy Imbalance Market, we're able to help balance needs within 5-minute windows. And obviously we're balancing every 4 seconds. So from that perspective, we don't anticipate that being a challenge. Again, we're dealing with a high voltage. The challenge will be more on the distribution system operator, making sure that they're in balance and harmony with the grid at the distribution and high voltage transmission interface.
want to build on that from a distribution perspective?
Yeah, let me add to that. From the grid capacity standpoint, yes, it'll definitely add more load, right? Like Tom had mentioned before, we also, from the utility, forecast every year, every 5 years, or not forecast every 5 years, but we forecast every year, but we forecast 5 years out, 10 years out. And we try to, again, not work alone because, again, the counties, the CEC, the CPUC sort of influence our forecast. And how we justify projects is we try to build out or try to forecast out in a way that allows us to be ahead of the curve. So be ahead of when the actual grid capacity is an issue.
List or the admin team that we're going to be rotating in 2 minutes here. So there is another question in the chat, and it relates to restoration timelines. So probably a question best suited for PG&E. Can you explain the time required for restoration of service, electric versus gas after a major earthquake? I know there's probably a lot of variables in that, Tom, but
yeah, and I will say that after a major earthquake, I mean, I really don't know. I'll be honest, I don't know what the response would be from a major earthquake. I imagine that both facilities, honestly, especially if they're undergrounded, would both be impacted, right? So the restoration time would just involve not only just our GC, but it would probably involve in our electric side. If we think about, and I'm just thinking out loud, if we simplify that system and we go all electric, right? It may be that the earthquake would make it simpler because it would just involve one set of construction crew, and it may be easier for us to resolve it from that perspective. So just thinking out loud, but I think it would entail more detailed of how we did it historically versus how it might be in the future.
Rick, did you want to expand on your comment there?
If I can just say, I'm an architect. I do affordable housing. I renovate, and I both new construction and renovation all over the Bay Area. You know, the incentive programs are wonderful, but they're a pittance in comparison to the cost of renovating a building. And I've got one in Marin and one down in East Palo Alto I'm doing right now. You know, and the costs for replacing a gas system, which frankly everybody was advocating a mixed fuel system 15 years ago, and that was the standard that everybody did. It's a huge cost because everybody reduced their loads, they reduce their wiring, they reduce their infrastructure within the building, and then PG&E reduce their infrastructure to the site. So it's a ripple effect. You can't just do it on a renovation of an apartment building. It is a huge cost associated with it. And so, you know, this is a very big shift, and I'm very supportive of it. But when people are saying $1,700 of incentives in a bedroom per bedroom, and it's $40,000 a unit to change to a all electric building, you just don't understand the magnitude of the implications. So I just think a little bit of reality check versus just spiritual advocacy, it would be really helpful. And on a project with a $350,000 solar voltaic system that you're hoping to size to 80 or 90% of your common loads on an apartment building, you can only get to that if you're doing a relatively low slung building. So you know, two and three stories, 4 is a stretch, but maybe you can get close to that. So I think that in a $350,000 for a 40 unit project, you're spending a lot of money per unit a solar voltaic system, and that at 10,000 a unit begins to pencil out. I just say that you have to put some real numbers on these things to understand what the cost is, and a first cost is usually the one that the development community, particularly on the affordable housing, has to make their decisions on, because they have limited funding and limited financing. And if they can get a program like EH does great on all of their projects, but this is serious money they're talking about relative to a single family home, which can and when people say, you know, it's a lifestyle choice, I said only in Marin. It's not a lifestyle choice to a lot of other people. And so I think that it's something that we have to be, I'm super advocate for it. I just want people to really think about what the real serious numbers are, because there's a lot of cost associated with all of these decisions.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. Sorry to interrupt here, Sebastian. We have literally probably 20 seconds, so it has to be like one question, and then
I apologize.
Ellen will kick us off. No worries. Everyone ask your questions in the chat box if you could. But Sebastian, please.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And no need to apologize, Rick. That's valuable feedback. Yeah, we know that there are a lot of upfront capital costs associated with building electrification. I do want to stress the proposal as it stands is for new construction.
Understood.
And not retrofits. So just wanted to make that clear. But I think we do have time for one more question if anybody wants to ask before we go back to the breakout rooms or to the main panel.
Looks like we have 50 seconds.
I just had a comment, you know, where we've got to hit though is the existing buildings. We're not going to get very far with new buildings. In terms of that pie chart you guys started off with, you know, of reducing greenhouse gases. So we've got to find the money and the subsidies and the requirements to make that transition in existing buildings. And that's what's lacking from the program you put on the table so far.
Thank you, Bill.